Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster. I am the host of the program. And as I always say, I have some exciting guests on SMAC. And I'm always happy to be here with my executive producer, Roy Cohen. Today we have what I call a native son. Someone has been here in Stoughton, has left us to go to other places, some exciting engagements that he is involved in. And I'm going to bring him on to and invite him to tell us all about the great things that he is doing at the present time. And the person of whom I'm speaking is our former town moderator. I believe he was also a town meeting member, and he may have been in other committees here in Stoughton. That is the Reverend Adam Dawkins. So, Reverend, welcome once again to Community Forum.
Well, I thank you so much, my friend. It's so good to see you. It's so good to be back in the saddle here on SMAC again, as it were, and to be among friends in Stoughton. Even though I'm quite far away at the moment, Stoughton is and always will be my hometown. And I'm honored that you called me your a native son, because that's how I like to think of myself too.
Well, in terms of fine, you were such an instrumental person here while you were in Stoughton, and that doesn't go away. But also, you were a host on SMAC, so therefore we have many connections with regards to your time that you spent here in Stoughton. And why don't we start there? I mean, I think what's helpful, Rev, a lot of folks may not know you in that capacity being Reverend Adam Dawkins. And so why don't we give folks a little background so that they know who you are from the time that you were here in Stoughton, and wherever you might want to start in terms of education experiences. Why don't we start there so our viewing audience knows who Adam Dawkins is?
Sure. Well, I imagine that most people who may be viewing this program won't know me as the Reverend Adam Dawkins, because I've only been the Reverend Adam Dawkins since late April of this year, and I have not had a chance to come back home to Stoughton since my ordination to the diaconate, and so I was in Stoughton until June of 2019, when my spouse, also named Adam Hartsock, and I moved from Stoughton to Sewanee, Tennessee, where I entered the seminary as a seminarian, preparing for ordination to the priesthood for the Episcopal Church in Massachusetts. And so I had to go to seminary for 3 years to complete my academic formation for for my ordination journey. And that required it required us to uproot, as it were, and to leave our very rich lives and our very beloved community there in Stoughton to head off to seminary in order to follow this journey and to answer what I perceived and what we perceived to be God's call. And so we went off to Sewanee, Tennessee, where we spent 3 years. Of course, the pandemic happened while there, and that precluded my coming home to Stoughton very much during my time in seminary, although I did get to come home toward the end of the pandemic 1 or 2 times, and it was wonderful to see everybody during those visits. So I was ordained a deacon in Sewanee, Tennessee, at the chapel at the University of the South this past April 25th.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I was ordained on behalf of the Bishop of Massachusetts, where I am what we call canonically resident in the Diocese of Massachusetts, meaning that I may be far away at the moment, but my hide belongs to Massachusetts, shall we say. And so I am, so that is, so I was ordained there in order to go on to do ministry outside of Massachusetts at this time. And whatever the future may hold in terms of my return to Massachusetts, that really depends on the needs of the church, and where and how those things align with my own availability. But all I can say is that we stand ready to come back home whenever that time may be.
Well, why don't you let folks know? I know in our discussions before we came on air, you were telling me you're in British Columbia, is where Vancouver, British Columbia is where you are. Talk to how that happened. And I'm also curious, so I'm going to raise this issue and you can answer or not. One is, as far as which denomination. I think you did say Episcopalian, but why don't we clarify that?
Yeah.
And let's talk about, because we know that the churches have, and various churches have views about, in terms of the sexual orientation, gay marriages, etc. Talk about how this experience is somewhat different. I know I grew up as a Catholic,
Right.
and and I think the Roman Catholic Church has its views. I'm now a Christian, and his views as well. Talk to us. I think it's helpful to have this conversation if you feel comfortable having it for our viewing audience, so that we can educate them on what's going on in this society. So if you, one, I've already mentioned you're in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Right.
And if I am correct about the church you're in, as far as now a member of and a diaconate, ordained deacon in that church, and moving towards, hopefully towards what, priesthood, talk about that and the question that I've posed to you.
So let me start at the beginning of that and just sort of clarify. So yes, I am in Vancouver, British Columbia at the moment, where I'm working on the clergy staff of Christ Church Cathedral here in downtown Vancouver, a very beautiful city if you haven't visited, and I hope that everyone will visit Vancouver at some point in your lives, because it is truly one of the most magnificent cities in North America, besides Stoughton, of course. But it really is a very magnificent city, very welcoming, and a wonderful place. So I am currently here working at the cathedral, as I mentioned, which is a parish of the Diocese of New Westminster, which is the local diocese here in Vancouver, and is part of what we call the Anglican Church of Canada. So I am ordained in the Episcopal Church. We are a member of what's called the Anglican Communion. And the Anglican Communion, which is made up of churches throughout the world, including the Church of England, and the Anglican Church of Canada here in Canada, and so we are sister churches bound together in the Anglican Communion, and so it is not uncommon for us to trade clergy and to work in each other's churches at various points in our careers and in our ministries. So so I'm here, and that all sort of happened because last summer I was actually on this program last summer, and I also was reporting live, as it were, from Vancouver back in July of last year, a year ago this month, when I was here as an intern working in the Office for Indigenous Justice Ministries here in this diocese in Vancouver, and I was working here with this church's initiatives to promote Indigenous justice, particularly in the wake at that time and continuing today of the discovery of, shouldn't say discovery, because Indigenous peoples have known about this for many years, but I should say the rather acceptance, I suppose I should say, of the fact that there are countless graves of children at residential schools throughout Canada, and those are graves of Indigenous children who were forced into those schools by way of assimilation, cultural assimilation, in the 19th and 20th century, and it's just been nothing short of cultural genocide, and indeed plain out genocide here in this part of the world. These discoveries are also getting made in the United States, and as an Indigenous elder said to me last summer here in Vancouver, that the policy toward Indigenous peoples in the United States was one of essentially murder, that we sort of wiped people out, that we killed the human person in the United States, in our answer to what we call the Indian problem.
And I just want to jump in for one moment,
Yeah.
because now that you mentioned that has been widely disseminated in the news, at least within the past couple of months here, because your mentioning of it reminds me of some of the reporting. And yes, I'm glad to see that you're at the epicenter of that conversation of trying to address that injustice, and it was fairly widespread. And when they talked about the burial grounds at those places, it was definitely heartfelt. So
Sure,
I'm glad to see that you're dealing with that particular issue.
But the American answer to that question in the 18th and 19th centuries especially was one to essentially to kill the person. in Canada, it was really to kill the spirit. It was one of cultural assimilation. There was not the widespread murder of indigenous peoples in this country as much as there was a simple a policy to take the Indian out of the Indian child. And so there was a murder of the spirit in a way here in this place. And that, much of my ministry and my time here is spent thinking about how it is we might find paths toward reconciliation. And reconciliation always costs something. And that's very much the case here in the church, that much of what happened in the history here is at the hands of the church. And we're reckoning with that. And so to be part of the life of the church in this place at this time, I think will shape the rest of my ministry. And I only hope that I can contribute something of value to this place during my time here.
Can I ask you, are there any other denominations that are addressing that particular issue? Because it just was not the Anglican Church. And I have some memory, as I have studied some religious history at various points in times in my life. Can you tell folks what is the Anglican Church? I know it has ties to England, and I have some recollection. So help us in our understanding of what the Anglican Church is.
The Anglican Church is the sister church of the Episcopal Church here in Canada, and again tied together in communion with the Church of England, and with scores of other churches throughout the world in the same tradition. So it's the church that's in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's the leader of the Church of England and of the Anglican Church throughout the world, the Anglican Communion throughout the world, the spiritual leader of those churches. So again, we have a close kinship here in this church with the Episcopal Church, which is the church in which I'm ordained there in the United States.
So on the question of I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to answer your other question quickly, which is to say that we are not alone, certainly, in this path toward reconciliation. This has gone all the way to the Pope for our Roman Catholic siblings, and in fact, Pope Francis has committed to visiting Canada, to meeting with Indigenous peoples here, and the hope among Indigenous peoples in this country and in this place is that the Pope will formally apologize for the Catholic Church's role in that genocide over the years, and so he has apologized in Rome for the church's role in all of this. But of course, I think the hope is that he will do the same thing here in Canada on Canadian soil, during his visit, which I think is set to happen sometime in the next few months. But other churches as well. I mean, certainly, other Protestant denominations. There has been, through most of mainstream Christianity, there has been a reckoning for our role in residential schools, which really were funded and mandated by the government, but run by the church, in partnership with the church. So certainly, even though this was a government mandate, our hands are in no way clean of what happened, and the cultural genocide and the deaths that happened as a result of the residential school system here in this place. So,
well, what I just want, again, I'm always, I guess it's the lawyer in me, I want to make sure that I do with the clarification, because I don't want folks to walk away from this conversation and feel that this only occurred in Canada. I know you mentioned the fact that it occurred in the United States as well. And I do recall, I think I heard of the apologies, if you will, from the Pope, is what brought the conversation to broader audiences over the past couple of months. I think that's where I heard it from. When the Pope speaks, people do listen, and I think that that's what happened. Where in the United States, I mean, how widespread was it? Was it in a particular region of the United States? I mean, for instance, was it only in Vancouver's on the western part of Canada? Was it only in that segment of the United States, or was it throughout the United States where this was occurring?
Well, here in Canada, it's certainly been widespread, and I mean, every province of this country has been touched by this tragedy. The first I use the word discovery, even though that really is the wrong word, because again, the indigenous peoples have known about these tragedies for generations. Um, but for lack of a better term, discoveries that of mass graves in or not mass graves, but in mass numbers of graves in indigenous schools and former indigenous schools or residential schools last May of 2021. The first one was here in British Columbia. It was in the interior in a place called Kamloops in the eastern part of the province of British Columbia. In the United States, similar discoveries have been made in the Dakotas, and I think in other parts of the U.S. as well. And I think those kinds of discoveries are being made sort of as we go along. Even though, again, in the native memory in the United States, it is certainly the case that there's certainly an awareness of similar tragedies that have happened there. The one that I'm most that I think that I think is most recently discovered is in the Dakotas, but I know that there are others as well. I'm sure in Minnesota, possibly even in the South as well. I don't know, but I know that there are many.
Well, we know that the Native Americans suffered a lot in here. I've become increasingly more aware of that as I do more reading and there's more conversations. And I know that the Native Americans are speaking up more about these situations, what we call the long marches and other things, moving them from their territory. So
Right.
I'm sure there's probably going to be more that come forward. But it's always interesting and enlightening to have conversations with you, Reverend Dawkins. But I also I do want to come back to the issue for some that I mentioned to you about how the church's acceptance or non-acceptance in terms of gay marriages, sexual preference, etc. And it seems like your church has embraced that because they are now moving you towards a deacon and eventually to priesthood. Talk a little bit about that as acceptance in the Episcopal Church.
Sure. Well, it's this goes back to the 1990s when this conversation really sort of took hold in the Episcopal Church. It's gone way before that as well, but you all, the viewership may remember in 2003 that the Diocese of New Hampshire, the Episcopal Church in New Hampshire, elected a man by the name of Gene Robinson to be their bishop. And Bishop Robinson, was a married man, who was a man who was in a long-term relationship, a married relationship with his then husband, and it became quite controversial throughout the church, throughout all of the Anglican Communion, in terms of Bishop Robinson's election in New Hampshire. In the Episcopal Church, when a diocese elects a person to be a bishop, there has to be there has to be an approval process throughout every diocese in the Episcopal Church. I think you need 2/3, if I'm not mistaken, of every diocese to say, and the bishops and standing committees, as it were, of the diocese to approve of the election of a bishop in any diocese. And after that process completed in the Episcopal Church and Bishop Robinson's election was approved, then he was then ordained and seated as Bishop of New Hampshire. That began a painful conversation across the Episcopal Church, or was perhaps maybe even the most recent iteration of that very painful conversation that had started some time before, about what really is the question of are all of the sacraments meant for all people? And the Episcopal Church has been at the forefront of that question for generations now. I mean, the Diocese of Massachusetts, for instance, was the first diocese in the Episcopal Church and in the Anglican Communion, even throughout the world, to have a bishop who was a woman, the late Barbara Harris.
And wasn't there one who was an African American woman that
yes,
the head
indeed,
of the
she was a woman
Church?
of color. She was,
yes.
And Barbara Harris, who, God bless her,
Yes.
she went on to her reward in 2020, just at the beginning of the pandemic. She did not die from COVID; she died from other causes. But I mean, what a tremendous loss to all of us. I was very privileged and honored to know Bishop Harris and loved her and was inspired by her every time I saw her. She was quite a pistol. And if ever there was a person
that is true.
Ministry, if there was a person called to ministry, Barbara Harris was it. I mean, she was nothing short of a saintly woman. And I think the church now is the church now in the Episcopal Church is is in the middle of a conversation as to how and when we sort of raise her to the altars among the saints. Because
Well, I know she raised the awareness because, like I said, I
yeah, she
couldn't
did.
remember her name, but I definitely knew of her
Right,
in the religious community, and she was
right,
a force to be reckoned with, as there was with several personalities from the various faiths that were here, and definitely during some of Boston's most tumultuous times.
right.
She provided a lot of leadership and guidance. So, like I said, I
Right.
couldn't recall the name, but I definitely recalled the person and
Sure.
her influence on issues here in
Yeah.
Massachusetts.
She was the suffragan bishop of Massachusetts, which means that she is that she was sort of an assisting bishop in that diocese, but was in fact she was quite a trailblazer in that she was the first woman, and the first woman happened to be a woman of color. She was there in Massachusetts, and it made worldwide news when she was
Yes,
consecrated, and that really became a that really began or continued a conversation about the sacraments being available to all people. That conversation continued throughout. Bishop Harris was ordained a bishop in the late '80s. Throughout the '80s, throughout the '90s, into the early 2000s, you know, that conversation continued about ordination of women, ordination of people who are gay or bi or trans or any of those or members of the LGBT plus community. And so when Bishop Robinson was ordained and seated in the Diocese of New Hampshire as the first openly gay married bishop, that forced us into a deeper conversation about whether or not the sacrament of ordination of holy orders was available to all people indeed. And in fact, the church answered that question with a resounding yes, it is. And then that led us into another conversation about the sacrament of marriage and all of those things. I mean, so God created us male, female, and all things in between. God created us, with a variety of sexual orientations. God has created us in a variety of different diversities, all of which reflect the beauty of our God. And I am proud to be part of a church that embraces that and embraces me as a full creation of God, the God that we worship, the God that we praise. So
well,
yeah,
Rev, our time is running short because you and I always like the deepness and the richness of our conversations. We had this conversation such as these when you were here in Stoughton. You were instrumental in terms of, it's evident you have the leadership capabilities and abilities. That's the reason why both here in the town of Stoughton, as well as we're in into carrying you forward into the priesthood. And I envision great places for you. I'll be waiting for your ordination of bishop uh, somewhere, somehow in this church. But as we come to the closing segment of time of our conversation, to anything that you would like to be able to chat about. We have about 5 minutes or so, and I want to be respectful. I want Roy to allow me to come back and host programs in the future, so I want to make sure I be respectful in the time. But let's talk about some things that you would like to leave our viewing audience with.
I'll just say that my time in Stoughton and the invitation to serve the town as your town moderator, as members of town meeting, as a member of various town committees, and the opportunities that the town afforded me while I was there to be of service to the community, have all informed and been a massive part of my formation into ministry. And I want to say thank you to my beloved friends and family there in Stoughton for the opportunity to serve the town while I was there among you. I don't know whether it will be that I don't know whether God has it in the cards for me to return to Stoughton. I will tell you that for the foreseeable future, and certainly at this time, as I mentioned before in this program, I still belong, as it were, to the Diocese of Massachusetts, and because of that, I would expect that my ordination to the priesthood will happen there in Massachusetts, if not perhaps even in Stoughton, sometime later this year. And to be able to come back to Stoughton, the place that formed me and sent me on to this time in my life, to be able to come back there to be ordained will be one of the greatest joys and privileges of my life, and I'm still waiting for official word about that, but I hope that certainly comes down, and that I'm able to come back to my home, as it were, to be ordained and sent on into ministry as a priest. So so hopefully I can say more about that sometime in the near future, but that's my hope that will happen. But I just wanted to say that certainly my time as moderator, I think was certainly one of the most formational times for me in terms of public service, in terms of public leadership, and because the diaconate, for instance, is very much a servant ministry. I mean, the priesthood is as well, but the diaconate in a very certain way is a ministry of service. And I certainly thought of my time as moderator and the job of moderator in that way as well. And I just want to say thanks to all of you for embracing me the way you did, and for always instilling in me a sense of acceptance, a sense of welcome, and a sense of lifting me up for service. So thank you.
Well, I didn't have the pleasure of being a town meeting member when you served as a town moderator, but from all of the town meeting members that I have spoken with during your time of serving as moderator, you acquitted yourself well, and handled, because as you said, that is a position which requires certain types of skills, people skills, and also obviously knowledge of the rules and regulations, and you definitely acquitted yourself well. And I think that as I can think about deaconship within any denomination, there is a particular role that one does in terms of service and support to the priesthood or the priest in your diocese that you would provide. And I can see you doing that quite well as you ascend towards the priesthood within the Episcopal Church. So I just want to say that it's always a pleasure speaking with you. I see you are as vibrant and knowledgeable as you were when I saw you here in Stoughton. We certainly wish you well as you go forth. And again, just want to be able to say that I look forward to when things do occur in the future, that you will keep Roy and me informed so that we can be in the information flow to make sure that your friends and family and associates here in Stoughton are fully aware of what you're doing. So I just want to bid you a good day, Godspeed, and in terms of look forward to speaking to you sometime in the near future.
Thank you. It's been a joy to be back in the saddle again.
Take care.
All right.